Hi Seagull class. Today we have an art lesson about texture. Now, texture is the way that something feels. So either the way that it actually feels as you put your hand on top of it, or it could just be the way that it looks like it feels. So oftentimes artists will create a texture just by shading in different areas to make something look rough or bumpy or smooth. So texture is the way that something feels or the way that it looks like it feels. Now, artists have different techniques to create texture in their artwork. If they paint, sometimes artists use a dry brush technique, and it can look kind of rough around the edges especially. Instead of having smooth, continuous lines, the lines end up looking a little broken, or sometimes they get thickened and thinner with a dry brush. Another technique that artists use is called impasto. And now impasto, the artist is actually using paint to build a texture that you can feel with your hand. So the brush strokes can be seen very easily. An artist that you're familiar with who's used this a lot is Van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh used a lot of paint, especially when you use oil paint. You can build a texture that you can actually feel with your hand. And those places that are thicker with paint create a shadow when you're just looking at it. Because as you know, you're not supposed to be touching famous artworks. Another technique that artists use is called stippling. And stippling is little dots or sometimes little dashes to create a painting or a drawing. Now there are different types of texture. Two types are either real texture, where it's actually physically texture, that you can run your hand over and your hand can feel the texture. There's also implied or simulated texture, which means that it just looks like there's texture. If you put your hand over it, you wouldn't actually feel anything different. There's also lots of different adjectives we can use for texture. I thought of some down here: rough, smooth, furry, shiny, hard, slimy, soft, silky, dry. I thought of 9 different adjectives to describe something, the way something feels or its texture. I wonder if you can think of any more. Well, our project today, you might be able to think of some more. So you have your piece of paper in front of you, and you're going to fold it into 6 equal parts. So first we're going to fold it in half long ways, matching the 2 long sides together. And if you make sure that you get your corners matched up, then you'll have a nice straight line when you open up your paper again. Now we're going to try and fold our paper into thirds. So instead of just folding it halfway short ways, we're going to first gently put the right side over and then the left side, and then kind of move that around until it seems like they're right on top of each other. And if it's not exactly thirds, it's okay, because as you practice this technique, you'll get better and better with it. You see, mine isn't even exactly thirds. I have a little bit of extra on the side. But when I open it up, it's pretty close to being in thirds. Oh, and look at that. If we have something that's divide it into 3 equal pieces, into thirds, and then each of those thirds are taken 1/2 times. How many pieces did we end up getting? 6. Look at that. Okay, so for each of these rectangles that you've now made, we're going to find different textures around the house. But we're also going to leave a space at the bottom of each rectangle to write a special adjective with however we think that texture looks. So take one of your color pencils. I'm going to choose the black one, just something that's dark and a color that you don't want to use for your texture, and draw on these lines that you made by folding your paper so that we can section these 6 rectangles off. So now you can really see my 6 rectangles. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that's parallel to my center line. So that I leave space to write my adjective right here. So for the texture that I put here in this rectangle, I'll put the word right underneath it. And for the texture that I put in this rectangle, I'll put the word or the adjective that describes it right underneath. And the same for this one. We'll put the adjective down here. Now we have this row of rectangles on the bottom also. So we're going to draw a line that's parallel to the bottom long side. Or at least as close as we can get it. You can use a ruler if you'd like. So for each of these textures, we can write the adjective that goes along with the rectangle right underneath it. Let me show you what I mean. So you're going to choose 6 different colors for all of your different textures that you do. I think this first one I do will be light cerulean blue. And luckily, I have a very interesting texture right here on my wall. So I'm going to put my paper here. I'm going to start with this top left one. And I'm just going to lightly shade over my wall, being careful not to get pencil on my wall. There we go. Ooh, look at that texture. So this is kind of like the frottage that you did with leaf venation, if you remember that lesson. Now, how would you describe that texture? Would you say it's smooth, or fuzzy, or slimy? I think I would call this bumpy. So, underneath, in my best handwriting, I'll write bumpy. And if you're not sure how to spell the word that you want to use, you can just sound it out as best you can. And then later, if you weren't sure, you can look it up, and if you misspelled it, that can be one of your spelling words. But the most important part of our art experiment today is just to get the textures down. So if you have a misspelled word, it's okay. There. Bumpy. Now I'm going to choose a different color for my next rectangle. I have so many pretty colors to choose from. I think I will choose, oh, this is one of my favorites. Blue Violet Lake. And with Blue Violet Lake, I need to find a different texture around my house so that I can repeat that experiment in the next rectangle. So something that's not bumpy, or is differently bumpy, if it is bumpy. Oh, I know. The table I'm working on is very different. Well, why don't I take that texture? So I'm just going to lightly fill in this rectangle. If you push down too hard with your pencil, you end up losing some of the detail. Also, another technique is to go in the same direction while you're doing this. That way you can really get a good sample of the texture that you're trying to get. So lightly and in the same direction. Sometimes you might have to move your direction around because of the way that your hand is angled. But if you don't have to, try and go in the same direction. Okay, so this is the texture of my table. Not really bumpy. It's actually pretty smooth. So that will be my adjective that I'll write neatly underneath. There, smooth. Okay, I'm gonna go finish my texture sampler, and I'll put a picture of my finished experiment up on our Google Classroom page. I'd love to see your finished experiment when you're finished. Send me a picture.